My name is Angie, and this is a story I wasn't supposed to find.
And I'm her sister, Cindy. We grew up hearing almost nothing about our great-grandmother, just a name, Stella Smith. No photos, no grave, just a blank space in the family story.
We knew a little about her, like she was married in Springfield, Illinois in 1925. She had 2 daughters that she gave up for adoption through the Illinois Home and Aid Society. And then absolutely nothing. Nothing before 1925 and nothing after giving up her children in 1930.
We had no idea what happened to her, where she went, or even if she was alive for long after that. She was just missing, and she stayed missing for over 90 years until a DNA test cracked the case wide open.
This is Buried Threads, a podcast about family secrets, silence, reinvention, and what happens when lost stories begin to resurface.
As always, we want to recap where we left off our last episode, just to keep everybody up with the story and where we are. So my sister and I have been searching for our great-grandmother, Stella Smith, who seemed to vanish in history after 1932. We came in contact with a close DNA match named Paul, and as a result, we were able to connect his relative, his grandmother, Estrella Suarez, with our great-grandmother, Stella Smith. In other words, they were the same person.
And we've been able to add a little bit to Estrella's story, knowing that she came to the U.S. as a child to live with her relative, Manuel Suarez, a widower and single father of Luisa. Estrella lived with Manuel, his new wife, Rosa, daughter Luisa, and then their subsequent children, as far as we know, until she married Emilio Valdez on August 21st, 1922. They last lived together in Taylor Springs, Illinois, where Estrella and Emilio lived right next door to Manuel and Rosa, until Estrella left Emilio and their young daughter, Mary Rose, and disappeared.
Let's pick up the story here because we have a lot to cover this episode. We're going to explore what we know about Estrella's life after leaving her little family in Taylor Springs. So just remind us how we know about when Estrella moved to Taylor Springs and how she got there, just in a nutshell.
Yep. So Rosa and Estrella and Luisa were living in St. Louis. Manuel was living in Southern Illinois, working at a mine, supporting the family. They got married, and when they got married, they moved to Taylor Springs, where they also worked in the mine there, and that's where the family began. And once they settled there, living together as a family unit, they had some more children. I believe 2 were born in Taylor Springs, and then the other 2 were born in they lived in some other small towns, where they eventually ended up in Sandoval, Illinois.
All roughly in the same area in central Illinois.
South Central.
Okay. And Estrella shows up on the 1920 census there in Taylor Springs,
yes.
Correct? So that's the first official record there together. For anyone who isn't familiar with the area, Taylor Springs is a very small town, about an hour south of Springfield, Illinois. It is relatively close to Springfield, which is, of course, the state capital. It's not too far from St. Louis, Missouri as well. It is a very rural area of central Illinois. I couldn't find a population for this time frame, for the time frame that they would have been living there, but recorded populations have remained under 1,000 pretty much in its existence. So we can guess that it was less than 1,000 for sure.
I believe it was like basically a mining town at that time, where basically everybody that lived there was working in the mines.
Was working in the mines nearby. In 1911, the American Zinc Company opened in this tiny little town, pretty much making it up. And it was described as the largest smelter in the world at the time.
Wow.
So smelting is the process of extracting metals, specifically zinc in this case, from ore. So Manuel was a smelter, and work brought him to the area. We know that for sure. Work brought him to the Midwest in the U.S. And you were telling me that Manuel's job specifically was working the furnace. So it would have been dangerous work, and it would have been hard work.
Yeah.
That would have been a hot job.
Yes.
All right.
Well, we know that Estrella lived in Taylor Springs when she married Emilio. And according to some documentation, Emilio was also from Spain, and he also worked as a smelter.
Makes sense. Estrella gave birth to a baby girl named Mary Rose in 1923. And recently, Paul told you he had his mother, Mary Rose's birth certificate, and was willing to share a copy, which is fantastic. Mary Rose's mother is Estrella Suarez, but we found it interesting that on her birth certificate, her mother's name is listed as Stella Suarez. We assumed Stella was a completely new name that she came up with after leaving her family, after leaving Emilio and Mary Rose. But apparently, she did go by the name Stella while married to Emilio.
Which also means that she was dropping the Spanish version of her name. She'd already anglicized the name.
That's before. Right. And you can't pick a more generic Anglicanized name than Smith. Yeah. Right. Well, Stella, but Smith. Right. Yeah, exactly.
Well, I was so excited when Paul sent me that document. It was the first official document in my possession that had her name on it, other than the census, which was more of like a, written down oral thing. And so I was just so excited to be able to see that. It's also interesting to know that she used Stella even when she was married to Emilio. I mean, it's not unusual to use a nickname of sorts. My name's Angela. I go by Angie. And it wasn't unusual among immigrants to have, at that time, to choose a name that might sound more common or might sound more
American. Yeah. So we've added Stella Suarez to the list of names for our great-grandmother. So now we have Estrella Suarez, Stella Suarez, possibly Estrella or Stella Valdez, Stella Smith, and Stella DeBoard.
Yeah.
That's a lot of names.
That's a lot. That we know of.
Right.
This is one of the challenges when looking for family members and doing genealogical research. Identification wasn't standardized. It was easy for people to use multiple names or a nickname, which just makes it that much harder to trace through documents and through history. And she was not a citizen. And so also that made the amount of documentation less. Had she gone and become naturalized, there's a much bigger process and where a lot of information is given, but she never did.
And a lot less of a footprint than it would be now, let's say. You almost have to have personal documents or family stories to really connect the dots between any official documents you can find or just public. Right. Like, not that a newspaper is an official document, but you do find a lot of things announced in the newspaper.
They put everything in the paper.
They put everything in the newspaper, but you almost have to have personal documents or family stories to really connect the dots, to fill out the whole narrative.
Yep, it's true. Which is challenging when researching events that took place over 100 years ago.
Right.
It's one of the reasons that finding a close DNA match in Paul, who was our grandmother's first cousin, makes such a big difference.
Paul is our mother's first cousin.
Correction, yes, our mother's first cousin. He grew up with people who had some firsthand knowledge of Estrella, or at least some stories that were passed down. We didn't have that because our grandmother was adopted as a very young child and didn't have any firsthand knowledge of her birth family.
Yeah, ever, her whole life. But even when stories are passed down through generations of family, not all details are remembered and handed down. So you were posting about our search on Reddit.
Yes.
And someone decided to do some sleuthing. Not anybody that you knew,
Nope.
Just somebody who was reading it. And so they reached out to you with information that we didn't yet know. And Paul didn't really know either. And we don't think really
It was talked about.
Yeah, that it was talked about. But do you want to share what you found from that person?
So Reddit is like your own little army of detectives.
Right.
You put something on there and they just run with it. And so it's been kind of fun to do that. And so when I put information about this out there, some sleuthers went to town and some things they found I already knew. I say thank you very much. But one produced a document showing that actually when Mary Rose was born, she was a twin. And so there was a baby boy and a baby girl. The boy's name was Joseph. And he did not survive. He was stillborn. And so that was just, very sad. And so that documentation was shown, there. And again, you understand why these things weren't always talked about in families. It's a time of great pain. But I found that very interesting. And it really helped me to reframe some of what I understand about some of the choices that she made. I still don't understand all the choices that she made and have, questions about the path of pain that she left in the choices that she made, but it does give some context to some things that she was going through as well.
Sure, she had her own pain. It must have been, I imagine, very hard to carry the joy of the arrival of a beautiful baby and at the same time to mourn the loss of a child at the same time. That's a lot for a young bride to deal with.
She was very young. She was 16 when these babies were born. And think about this. They didn't have ultrasounds, right? So she likely didn't even know that she was having twins until she was in, delivering. And so she's young. First birth is very traumatic anyways. And then the death of a child. I don't know what happened after, but just knowing what the general way of the world was, we didn't know a lot about how these things are best handled. There likely wasn't things like counseling, and I think of postpartum depression and some of those things. It just really reframes a lot of what that early experience of motherhood might have been like.
Yeah, I think we know now a lot more about grief and about handling grief and caring for the grieving. And then, like you said, like postpartum depression would not be a recognized diagnosis for several more decades after this. So it's interesting to consider how this type of loss may have impacted her future choices. We don't know, but it's at least worth considering that it's definitely part of her story. Even if she didn't suffer from something like postpartum depression, she surely grieved the loss of a child, and I'm sure it had an impact.
And that may have played a role. I'm sure it may have played a role in her future choices, because I know it wasn't long after that to giving birth to 2 additional children, and then also walking away from them. And people make a variety of choices, but I would say in general, I wouldn't call it a normal behavior to abandon 3 children.
Correct.
It's just not something that
yeah,
is a typical behavioral choice. Paul told us the story from his family was that Estrella just left in the night. And of course, they speculated further, but no one seemed to actually know where she went or what happened after she walked away from Emilio or Mary Rose. And it appears that Manuel and Rosa didn't talk about it. So even if they had opinions, it may just be that the kids didn't know.
It just wasn't talked about in front of them in a way
Correct.
that they would have known.
Yeah.
Do we know if anybody searched for her? Were there, police reports or was it put in the newspaper?
I did search in the newspaper. Unfortunately, Taylor Springs is a very small town, so I had to look at several papers around, because who knows where it might be published, but I didn't find any record of anything there. I did police record checks. I did a Freedom of Information request to the police departments, and I just can find no evidence of that. And Paul didn't seem to think there was any search in that way. So
interesting. And of course, we still don't really know all the circumstances surrounding. I mean, the story kind of is she just left in the middle of the night, but like, I'm just kind of a literal person. So I'm like, did she literally disappear in the middle of the night? Did she just not come home one day? Like, did she just walk off? Like, we don't really know all the circumstances surrounding that. So
we talked about this before, but I have a hard time believing she did that alone. Like, she would have needed some help to navigate that. It's also interesting and worth saying, so the way the birth order happened, Rosa's youngest child was born about 6 months after Mary Rose. So that means Estrella and Rosa would have been pregnant at the same time. Estrella first and further along, in the pregnancy than Rosa was. And then after Estrella left, that Manuel and Rosa just took the baby and cared for her and raised her side by side.
2 babies. Plus their other children.
Exactly.
Yeah. Wow. Well, our listeners know by now, if you've been following along with us, that the next documentation we have of Estrella or Stella is a newspaper posting announcing the wedding of Stella Smith and Christopher Columbus DeBoard. Not to belabor this, but let's just draw a quick connection between Estrella / Stella Suarez / Valdez and Stella Smith.
So we know that Stella Smith is our great-grandmother who married Christopher Columbus DeBoard. This is verified by the limited documentation from the adoption agency and also from the marriage license. We have an actual copy of the marriage license, and it was also published in the paper when their marriage license was issued. This is also confirmed by DNA. There are clear DNA matches on both sides that prove that she is the father, or she is the mother, and he is the father. We also, as I said, are connected to Paul and others in his family through these DNA matches. There's numerous, probably 15 in that close family circle. As we compare timelines and personal histories, Estrella is the clear link between our 2 families. In other words, they are the same person. Estrella is Stella. So the paper trail for Estrella picks up with a marriage license in Springfield, a new name, a start of a second life, and this time as Stella Smith.
In 1925, DeBoard. So in 1925, Estrella Stella married Christopher DeBoard. Christopher was a World War I veteran, a wanderer by nature.
He has his own
it's a whole episode by itself. The records suggest that he didn't hold a steady job and his life was defined by instability. We know Estrella and Christopher had 2 daughters, Florence, who was born in September of 1926, and Marie Christine, our grandmother, born in January of 1928. But by 1930, really even before that, late 1928, life had unraveled for Estrella Stella once again.
So the one thing that points to that, there's kind of two things. So there are 3 newspaper articles that list discharges from the hospital in Springfield.
That is so bizarre to me. Can we say HIPAA? I know it wasn't a thing yet, but like this is why it exists, right?
And I did not say, what their medical affirmity was, but it did say this is the day that she was released. And so the first release from the hospital would have followed the birth of Florence, the oldest daughter. The second one would have followed the birth of Marie Christine, grandma.
Makes sense.
The third one was about 3 months after the birth of grandma.
So definitely not related to another birth.
Correct. And 3 months before she is determined to have later vacated the family fully.
Yeah.
Additionally, on each of those discharge notices, it always gave a home address. So the home address, when the first one, when Florence was discharged, or after Florence's birth she was discharged, that is the family home shared with Christopher on Keys Avenue, whatever. But the second one, when grandma was born, the address that was given was the address of Etta Montgomery, the woman that she worked for, the estate she worked on, which means that she was already working for her before the baby was born, which tells me likely she did not have custody of Florence at that time.
And wasn't living with Christopher.
She wasn't living with Christopher. And likely after the birth of grandma probably went into care very quickly. That's an assumption, but a well-founded assumption.
Yeah.
And then in addition to that, the third piece of information that kind of ties that together, many years later, which we'll talk about later, like 15 years later, Christopher files for divorce. He files for it in absentia. In other words, he can't find Stella. And so, he has to publish in the paper 3 times and, declare this, whatever. In there, he had to make a declaration of the last time that she was in the home. And he said that she last vacated the home in 1930. Now, again, that's broad because it was 14 years later when the divorce happened. Memories can be fuzzy, and who knows how he came up with that date, 1930, to like make that a moment in time. But that is also the moment, that is during a period of time that grandma was in foster care before she was adopted. So I think it's a strong hypothesis that Florence was already in care by the time she went into labor to have grandma, and that after grandma was born, that grandma would have gone right into care, which is probably why grandma was adopted, because then it was a brand new infant newborn that had gone to a foster home, and then was later adopted. And that's my analysis of those pieces of information.
So for sure, by 1930, Florence and Marie Christine had already been turned over to the Illinois Children's Home and Aid Society. Whether Florence was with foster family, actually, so would Marie Christine have been, because we know she wasn't officially adopted till later, but was adopted by the family who took her in foster care.
And the 1930 census, I should add to this, the 1930 census shows Stella at the home of Etta Montgomery as a live-in household help, as a resident of that home in 1930. And in 1930, in the city directory, she also shows up living with Christopher at their family home. Again, who knows how that came to be? Was it back and forth, or was it that he just hadn't fully accepted the fact that she was gone, and so he still listed her even though she was not? Unknown.
We don't know.
Unknown.
Yeah. I'm reminded about our grandmother doing her own search for her birth family. And she did do some of her own searching. We didn't find that out until after she passed, but she found a limited amount of information. And one of the things was that about the estate, which was Estrella or Stella's last known location. She, like as you said, that was Etta Montgomery's estate. She lived there. She worked there as a domestic worker. And our grandfather said that the family didn't want to talk to them and didn't want to say anything to them. Like they reached out to them. I think it was in the 1950s, and they did not want to say anything to them. Now, our grandfather is a character.
That's an understatement.
I wouldn't exactly call him the most approachable person. So the way we've heard this story is that they went to have this conversation. And we're not 100% sure about that, but that's the way the story was shared with us. I mean, they may just not have wanted to tell him, right? He's not he's
a little,
abrasive. Yeah. I don't know. So, but for whatever reason, they did not, in the 50s, that wasn't very long after this. So they really, if anybody there did know her or know about her, they didn't want to share anything.
So two interesting things. A couple months ago, Mom and I took a trip down to Springfield. We did a research day at the library, but we also went and found the estate. And it was kind of funny because we kind of pictured in our head, you hear estate like this big
sprawling
rolling country house. It wasn't like that, but it was definitely in an affluent area. It was an old Victorian home, and it was in an area that was filled with, lots of Victorian homes that I'm sure in there, it was still a nice home today, but I'm sure in its day was, worth much more. But it was still very much in the city, not like this rolling thing. But there was a carriage house at the back that had been later converted. I mean, it already was converted, had like a driveway to it, and was now like a garage. And so just hypothesizing that probably that's where she lived. If she was a live-in, oftentimes they wanted them, close enough to be able to
their own quarters, but
be able to respond to whatever was needed there. So, anyways, and then the other thing that was interesting. So when we were there, my mom did the work of all the city directories. And so she plowed through all the city directories and looking to try to verify all the people in the story on the timelines and all the different ones. And so she was able to actually find evidence of Stella listed living in that same home with Etta Montgomery as the maid as late as 1937, which was later than we had ever had.
That's the latest date so far.
So then we couldn't find it in 38 and 39, whatever. So then I was trying to look in 1940 and in the census. And of course, I can't find her on the census. That's been the whole thing. I can't find anybody in the 1940 census. Yeah. But I was looking at Etta Montgomery because in 1930s, Etta Montgomery listed Stella, on there. And so I thought, well, Stella's probably not there, but, maybe she had another maid or, somebody would just kind of give an indication. What I learned is it appears that house was missed on the 1940 census. I literally, and let me tell you, it's not easy to do. I literally had to research what is the enumeration district for that neighborhood, which took a long time to get that figured out, and then hand scrolled through every page of the census for that entire enumeration district to see if maybe that house had been misplaced and put in the wrong place. So it doesn't mean that she's not listed, Etta's not in the house. I mean, she is in the house in the 50 census and onward, but the 1940 census, the house didn't even make it on the census.
For one reason or another, it was
skipped.
Got missed.
So it's like, what about her? But the question is, the possibility exists that she could have still been there in 1940, and we just don't have record of it because of that, or maybe not. I was trying to see, was there another maid by 1940? There was another maid by 1950, so was there another one by 1940? But that information is now lost because there's no way to recoup that.
One error by a census worker could derail our family. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. So let's talk about that now. Remind us of what documentation we do have of Estrella or Stella's location between 1930 and let's say 37.
1930, she shows up on the census living in Etta Montgomery's home as household help. She also appears in 1930 in a city directory living with Christopher at their family home in
Springfield, Illinois.
All of those both in Springfield, Illinois. 1931, 1932, most of the years between 1931 and 1937, I think 5 of those 7 years, she shows up on the city directory at the same address, Etta Montgomery, as a maid. 1937 is the last year that she appears there. Just also for timeline placement, kind of jumping pins in time, Grandma's adoption was finalized in 1932. Okay. So it would have been in the middle of that. There are some letters where she had been a foster. She's about 4 years old, just around her 4th birthday.
When she was adopted.
Yeah. So she had been with the family. We don't know exactly when she got there, but most of her life. She came. She certainly came as an infant, was there. There were some letters that were saved that were written from the family, the foster family, her adopted family, to the agency, basically saying, when is this adoption going to get finalized? What's the holdup?
I can understand that, yeah.
Right. And there was a letter back that was written that said, I think we can move forward now. This is where we are. So the point is, during that time, we know that Stella's at the home from 1930 to 37. But the adoption wasn't finalized, which means her legal participation in this wouldn't have been done until 1932. Here's the other interesting thing. Again, I have adopted children, so I know a little bit about how the adoption process works as far as when they terminate you cannot adopt a child until the parental rights of the previous parent have been terminated. Yeah. So once those rights are terminated, they make a legal severing, and then they shift it over and, attach that child to a new set of parents. So in 1932, when the adoption was being finalized, there was a newspaper notice that was published, I think 3 or 4 times, basically giving notice to Christopher, saying, Christopher, your child's about to be adopted. We're giving you notice, which means that they didn't know how to reach him.
This is wild. Like, can we just talk about this?
But notice that they did not do a message for Stella,
which means
they still knew where she was.
Correct.
He was still in the same place that she had been in.
Did it? And it named Marie Christine.
Yes.
It said you're okay. Can we just? I keep this keeps blowing my mind that all this stuff is in the newspaper.
Yes.
Like a legal notice saying your parental rights are about to be severed.
Yes.
To this child, and you have this long to that's your business in black and white print forever and ever. Amen. That's crazy.
And in those days, everybody read the paper.
Everybody read the paper. Well, of course they did. Look at all the tea they got from reading the newspaper.
I mean, there were articles. I mean, some of the stuff I've read is just wild, But it would be like, Susie Smith is in town from Kansas City. She's planning to stay for 5 days. They had pork chops and gravy for dinner. Like, they had friends over to enjoy dinner with them. I mean, they lay it all out.
Oh my goodness. So that's 1937. Oh, I was going to ask you. So in 1940, the house didn't appear on the census. The next census, I assume Estrella was not there.
Correct. And there was another person that was in the maid.
So sometime between 1937 and 1950, she left.
Yes.
That's a lot of time.
It's a lot of time.
But okay.
Yes.
I mean, it helps us place her somewhere in a timeline.
Yes.
But really, after 1937, in terms of history and documentation, she disappears again. A second vanishing act.
Now, let's also just think about it's been an interesting process with all the research to overlay. You have all these different channels of research and overlay all the calendars together. Different things kind of show up. But let's think about for a minute. We know there's a 4th child. We don't know anything about when the child was born. Okay. We don't know how old she was. But let's just for the sake of argument say she had that child at age 40 or under. It's possible to have a child in your 40s, but let's just say for the sake of argument, she was born around 1905. So if you add 40 years, you're talking about 1945. So theoretically, this 4th child would have been born sometime before 1945. Now that's in the same window that we're looking at, because we know from 37 to 50 is when she left. So who knows why? She might have gotten pregnant and left at that point. Or she might have met somebody and got married. Who knows? And that's the thing with women too. She could get married and she could have used whatever name. She didn't get married. She did not get a marriage license under the name DeBoard. I can promise you that with 100%
Stella Smith.
certainty. She never did.
Or Estrella Suarez.
Correct.
Or Valdez.
Correct. Well, she did. Yes.
Any of those other aliases after Christopher.
But then let's just say whatever. Now also, let's just note she did stay as DeBoard.
Yes.
All the time through 1937. So from 1925 when she got married to 1937, the last record we have, she was Stella DeBoard the whole time.
Yeah.
That's a long time.
That is a long time.
An identity. But where she went after that. But then again, you remarry, you take on a new name. How do you trace that?
Yeah. So effectively, we're going to say she vanished again.
Yes.
Yeah.
We don't know where she is. So she left behind a little bit more clues this time. The adoption agency conducted this intake interview with Estrella. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but I'll recap it. She told them that Christopher had, this is a quote, no known faults, end quote. Remember that. That's going to be an important thing you'll want to remember later.
Yeah.
He had no known faults except for an inability to stay put and provide. There were no allegations of abuse or anything like that. What I find interesting about that is they were not together anymore. And when a couple break up, you're going to get all the tea from the woman. She's going to tell you everything bad she ever thought about the guy, right? And she did not. It was not recorded. Her words were there were no known faults. I find that to be interesting.
Yeah, a married woman giving up her child or children for adoption, but she doesn't have anything particularly bad to say about her husband.
That's.
She just says he doesn't stay in one place and can't provide, which, by the way, is a big deal.
Yeah.
It's a big deal. And there certainly would have been a stigma attached to a mother giving up her children.
Yes.
There still is today. Right? So it wouldn't be surprising to hear her give a more disparaging story about her husband. And maybe this is a spoiler alert, but it wouldn't be hard to come up with something for Christopher. just the kind of guy he was. Just saying the truth. But she doesn't do that here. She also doesn't give very specific reasons why, does she? I mean... So
that's the interesting thing. There's nothing given why. I have no idea why. But there's one interesting little clue.
Of course there is.
In there.
Of course.
In the paperwork from the adoption agency, it references a probation officer. Now, a probation officer. That means there was some legal trouble.
Right.
Now, I have done a Freedom of Information request to the Springfield Police Department, and I was told that no records exist at that time, so whatever happened didn't happen. The interesting thing is, if whatever she was charged with was connected to the children, it would have been sealed. For example, if she wasn't able to care for the child, or she was charged something happened with the child, or if it could just be literally inability to care, because in those days that was a crime. Like in today's day and age, if you cannot afford, if poverty is the reason that you can't care for your child, that's not a reason that the services of our country will come around you and provide the resources that you need to be able to have stable housing and those kind of things. That was not the case at that time. So, if it was something like that, that would have all been sealed when grandma's adoption records were done. But if it was something else, if there were other legal issues that came up, which is not outside the realm of possibilities, there would be a legal record, but we have been unable to get it. And so when we were at the Springfield Library, it's an amazing library. They have a whole genealogy room and staff that help you and whatever. They recommended doing some research through the law library and seeing if we could actually get any legal records drawn up. The other thing that I've written and I've tried to do, and I've not had any success yet, but sometimes it takes months, so we'll see what comes out of this. It dawned on me, again, I'm familiar with the adoption process and how some of those records go because I have 5 children that I've adopted. But again, once an adoption is finalized, all those records are sealed. Everything from the moment that adoption happens, as the judge bangs the gavel, everything is sealed, and it takes a judge to unseal those records. So 2 things that became interesting. First, as it dawned on me that Florence was never adopted. She stayed in foster care her entire life, which means that her records were never sealed. And so I've made a request to have access to her records, but they would have to come through the foster agency, which has now been absorbed by the Children's Home and Aid that no longer exists. It's now part of another big conglomeration out of Chicago. I've made a request there. I did not even get a response, so I have no idea if I'm going to hear anything. So it's very interesting to see what might be in those documents.
We were kind of talking, again, this is not my area of expertise, but thinking about FOIA and thinking about court records being public records. How far back does that go?
As far back as they have records to give.
So,
but they don't always keep the records.
Right. If there are court records on record still of anything, maybe, they would be there. It would be available for the court proceedings or whatever to follow up on, to request and follow up on. Yeah. But you're saying not if it was about the children specifically.
Right. If it was tied to their case. The other interesting little snafu that came up is there's a clerk at the county courthouse in Springfield that's very helpful. Has given me lots of records and different things that I've been able to track down. She's dug through many dusty files to pull out things that she can. And so she had me fill out a form to actually request to have the judge unseal my grandmother's adoption records. So I was very excited about this. And so I sent everything off, and she came back and said that she can find no adoption records to unseal. And this really threw me for a loop at first. I'm like, how can this be? Like, she clearly was adopted. But I suspect that the adoption did not happen in Springfield County.
In Sangamon County.
Right, Sangamon County. Because her family adopted lived in Macomb and out in that direction. Now, in today's day and age, like when I adopted my kids, they were adopted in the county that everything happened in. Like, we didn't live in St. Louis, but we adopted our oldest 2 in St. Louis County. So my assumption was the adoptions would have happened in Sangamon County, but they must not have. So now I have to make another request to the county. I got to try to find out where did the adoption happen and then make a request to that county.
Well, that would be the county I would start with. I don't even know what it is off the top of my head, but that's the one I would start with because that's where they lived.
Yeah.
So in a nutshell, we can't rule out the possibility that for some reason she may have been forced by the court to relinquish her daughters. And you put that together with that little bit of health history. She went back into the hospital. Who knows? That could have initiated if Christopher wasn't around, she was in the hospital, that could have initiated the girls going into foster care. Because we don't know why she was in the hospital.
Right.
She may have been out of the hospital, but maybe not well enough to care. We just don't know.
We don't know.
And then the idea of a probation officer says maybe there was something else going on. Maybe related, maybe unrelated to her giving up the kids. it may not have been her choice. Not trying to absolve her of that choice, just saying it's something we have to consider. Yeah. But it's also a thread for us to follow.
So the other thing, just to piggyback on that, we don't know where Christopher was all the places because he moved around a lot. And he kind of wove in and out of life and all the things. But there is documentation that he was at the Danville Veterans Home 3 different times between 1929 and 1931, which really overlaps these
in this time period. Yeah.
So clearly he wasn't here.
Yeah. And we won't know more until we continue to try to search the court records and see if we can pull up more. It's just a question mark.
We know that Estrella described her own upbringing in very painful terms. She portrayed herself as isolated in a household with many children. She was born abroad. She was raised by individuals not her parents. She appeared to feel valued more for her ability to help the family than as a member of the family. And it's hard to see where that swings. Was that an extreme opinion, or was that more of just, I don't fully fit in as a child of the family, but I also don't fully fit in as in the family I came from, or what that looks like, I don't know. But clearly lots of areas that would have affected identity. Whether that was reality or not is debatable. I will say that when family members of Estrella's half-siblings, of Manuel and the children, heard that, they were very hurt and very, very upset. That was hard for them to hear because they saw and they knew their grandparents to be loving and caring, and just the family unit as a whole, and found those to be very, very hurtful accusations that were leveraged by Estrella. But that is the story that she told. And that's how she told it.
And one thing we really haven't talked about in this time frame between 1928 and 1932, that's sometime after our grandmother's birth in January of 1928. And then, of course, when she was adopted in 1932, the children were given up, right? We know that. And we have to stop for a second and put that in historical context. 1929 was the big crash, right? And then we're entering the Great Depression. So there were a lot of families who struggled. There were a lot, severe struggle. We're not just talking about times are hard. We're talking about literally starving to death, trying to support their families in this time period.
A woman would be almost unable to have managed that on her own. She did not have the help of Christopher. Documented, did not have the help of Christopher.
Yeah. And so while we know she had work, maybe it was impossible for her to have work and have children, and Christopher's not around. And that's why we say we need to not judge because we can't know everything. But we do have to put that context of what was happening in the world over the top of this because we do have a historical understanding of that time period. And it would have been hard under the best circumstances for every family. It would have been hard.
And let's just also say, without going into all the detail, it'll be kind of a little teaser here. Christopher was not everything that she believed him to be. And she did not know the truth about a lot of things about him. And so that would have only made things more difficult.
Sure. So given that perspective, the larger context of the times, maybe she just couldn't, right? Like maybe she just could not. 2 small children, a husband who disappeared for long stretches, no stable income. And
her job is a live-in maid.
Yeah.
And let me also note, they had other maids at the home. She was not the only one, but she was the only one that lived there. So she had other household help, I would say.
Sure.
So she was probably, even though the label was, one census had servant and then crossed out servant and wrote maid. But probably more like personal attendant.
Sure.
This woman
a little
was
more
elderly.
close. Yeah. So
it's not an excuse, but it is a window into her world.
Yeah, for sure. Those documents you described gave us Estrella's last known location, and we really don't have anything after, 1937.
Absolutely nothing after 1937. Let me back up.
Okay.
The only other document that we do have, which does relate to Stella, but she doesn't know it. She never knew it, is the divorce decree.
Right.
So keep in mind that Christopher and Stella had not been together since somewhere between 1928 and 1930. The exact time we don't know, but somewhere in that range. They had not been together. They'd been living apart. By the time the divorce happened, it was in 1944, Christopher filed for divorce. They'd been apart for 15 years.
Yeah.
14 years, 15 years. So it becomes, it raises all kinds of questions. Why? Why would you bother having a divorce at this time? What's the reason? An attorney filed the divorce paperwork. It's written, because we have the full decree. We have all 50 pages of the decree, all the details of it. You could see the attorney's words. So again, he who never had a stable place, never had anything, two pennies to rub together, hired an attorney to file for divorce in absentia. Why would you do that? What are the reasons you can think of?
Well, and in the documentation, this kind of does speak, maybe it might speak to her location or where she is not located.
Correct.
Because in the documentation for the divorce decree, it does reference the last known address, and that is Etta Montgomery's home.
Right.
But it also documents that they could not reach her there.
Yes. And they also published 3 times in the newspaper.
And it was in the newspaper, of course.
Yes.
And as far as we know, she didn't respond. Now, it's possible that all of that happened and she just didn't respond. But social pressure and everything else, it's actually more likely that she just wasn't there by 1944. So we can guess that between 1937 and 1944, she was gone. Out of that area, or at least out of that town, which kind of fits that possible time frame we were talking about if she met somebody else and had another child. But considering it was such a long period of time between when they actually weren't together and the divorce, and we know that they weren't together, I am curious about why he suddenly filed for divorce. Did he want to remarry, which would be one reason? Was there another legal reason for divorce?
Well, we don't know for sure, but I tell you what, I have put in more man hours than I care to count trying to find a wedding marriage license in any state in the country showing that he remarried. And he has a, pretty unique name. And I can't say it doesn't exist, but I can tell you I can't find it.
I was just looking at this. So the divorce decree, it says, this is a quote, on November 1st, 1925, he, Christopher, was lawfully married to Stella DeBoard, defendant herein, and from the time of said marriage until October 1 of 1928.
Oh, I didn't see that. I didn't catch that.
October 1 from 1928. So that is, our grandmother would have been 10 months old.
Yes.
All right. He did live and cohabit with the said Stella DeBoard, which means October 1, 1928 is when she left, right? Or when they weren't living together, as her husband, and always now this is Christopher's side, always conducted himself as a kind, true, and loving husband, and provided her with the necessities of and comforts of life according to the best of his ability.
Well, he had a good attorney anyways.
I mean, it's two different perspectives, right? From her perspective, I have nothing bad to say about him. He just couldn't stick around and couldn't provide. And Christopher's like, no, I always conducted myself as kind, true, and loving, and always provided with the necessities and comforts according to the best of his abilities. Maybe that's the caveat. And then it says this, I know this is legal, right? But then it says, Stella DeBoard, defendant, not regarding her marriage vows and duty on October 1st, 1928, left and absented herself from the plaintiff and his home without any reasonable cause for the space of 1 year and upwards, and has persisted in such desertion, interesting word,
yes,
to present times.
And some of that's legal.
Some of it's legal, but it's
saying she's the one
that's his story. And she has her own story.
Yeah.
And somewhere in the middle is probably threads of truth in both of them, right?
Right.
So Estrella said Christopher couldn't stay put. Sounds like he wasn't in the picture, at least not regularly, which does fit everything we can find about Christopher. And then Christopher, many years later, said Estrella abandoned him. Maybe both things are true.
But it still leaves me with the question, why? Why would you bother getting a divorce after that many years? Why would you hire an attorney? What would be that? Regardless, Estrella remained a ghost in the records. The divorce was granted, showing that Estrella wasn't found or wasn't reachable. Now, it's another interesting thing that Florence was named in the divorce decree. Florence is the oldest daughter, my grandmother's sister. She was 2 years older than my grandmother. She was around 17 years old at the time of the divorce. She was the only one listed. In fact, the language of the decree says that there was one child born of this union, which is very confusing to my grandmother. Sure. Again, knowing how this works with the adoption of my own children, I know that because at the time of the decree, my grandmother had already been legally severed from them, it's like it never happened. So like when she was adopted, they would have generated a brand new birth certificate as if she was born to the original family, and it's like it never even was there, which is just weird.
That could be very confusing for our grandmother.
Well, I think it was. And so it was confusing to be, why is there only one child? Is that me? Was my name not what I thought it was? Or do I have a sister? And she never knew. That was the answer she never was able to. But I think it was confusing to her to see that. Sure. But nevertheless, it mentioned Florence, that she was the child of their thing, and custody of Florence was given to Christopher at age 17 and like a half, which I find to be very interesting.
That is interesting. Well, let's talk more about Florence. We've learned a little bit more about her life as we've been on this journey. When we talked about the 1930 census, we found her listed at a home with Christopher. And you surmise that Christopher wasn't actually caring for her full time. Rather, he probably came and went. So the question is, who raised Florence?
So their names are Chuck
and Della.
Thank you, Della. Redburn.
Redburn.
I could not think of the name. Redburn, and they were her foster parents. And they must have been like professional foster parents, because if you look at census before and after, they had other children that they had with them at that time. And on the census, the children were typically listed as boarders, which was typical because their legal status was kind of precarious. Foster care was a little bit different at that time than it was now. But Florence was also listed as a boarder, and then there were other boarders at the same time as her, some before and some after. But Florence remained in that foster home all the way until adulthood, and stayed with the same family. And one of the really cool things, this is really small, but to me it just showed that she was cared for and that she was loved. So one of the things that we found in our newspaper research when we went to Springfield, their paper had what they called a birthday club. And so basically every year, like parents would submit this little thing about, hey, this is your birthday. And then the paper would like print, so here it is, March 1st, here's all the birthdays for the day.
Now that I actually support being in the newspaper, right?
And so if you look at her childhood, every year on her birthday, someone, presumably the foster parent, submitted this birthday club and so every year there was an announcement that her birthday was. And I just thought that was just the sweetest thing to show that, this family really did care for her and filled that role as parent. And she was, she named those parents, like when she got married, she named them in her life. And so they were important people to her, and, she had a relationship with them.
Yeah. I was looking at some of the documents we have sort of documenting where we find, like in official documents or records, where we find her landing. So there's the census in 1930. It says Christopher, age 30. It says born 1898 in Missouri, listed as a factory painter, which is one of many jobs, living in District 87, Springfield, Illinois, with his daughter Florence, age 3. Yes. That was one census. And then you talked about Florence being engaged, and that was March of 1943, where a Springfield, Illinois newspaper announced her engagement. And I'm just going to read this. Private Percy Thurman, who was stationed at Jefferson Barracks, Missouri. But she lists her as the foster daughter of Mrs. Della Redburn. Yes. I'm guessing Charles had passed by that point. So that does speak to their close relation. Right. And then, of course, the divorce decree. Yeah.
So this became very interesting when we found this. We just found this marriage announcement. She didn't actually marry him. We just found the marriage announcement 4 months ago. Actually, my husband Stephen's the one that found it. And it was very shocking when we saw this. There's a picture, and it talks about Florence.
There's a picture of Florence as well.
First of all, it's the first picture we ever
saw. We'll post it. It's great.
Yes. Yeah. It's an interesting picture. But anyways, the picture of her, and it said she was engaged to this man, and I knew she had been married later, but it wasn't his
name.
Guy.
Yeah.
And she married this other guy when she was a little older, in her 20s. And so at first I was like, could this be the right person? Are we just confused? Is someone the same name? But then it mentioned Della Redburn. Well, there's no way. It had to be, her, and also named her as foster parent. So again, all the things. And so began to unravel what we think may have happened and why and actually connects the divorce and what happened. So at the time of her engagement, she was only 16 years old, and she was to be a war bride. So the person that she was marrying, he was shipping out, I want to say it was in March of that year, to go, serve in the war. And, there was this excitement and they had an engagement party at the home of his parents, which by the way is St. Charles, Missouri, and we're going to get to the importance of that later. But anyways, and off to go. But then they didn't get married. And then I kind of put 2 and 2 together. At 16, she would have needed parental consent in order to get married. And who could have signed that parental consent? Her foster parent could not. They did not have legal status to be able to do that.
Right.
And neither Stella or Christopher could do it without the presence of the other one because they both had legal custody.
So they couldn't. So one parent couldn't do it.
Yes, and so so it's kind of sad, but she wasn't able to marry him, and he ended up shipping off, and
and they didn't get married.
Yeah. And then came back and he married someone else, and he and his wife lived a long, happy life, whatever. But then shortly after that began the divorce proceedings. That's when you saw the three postings to Stella.
It was like within a year of the announcement.
Yes,
the divorce was
happening. And so then it dawned on me, of all the things I can say about Christopher, and I have a lot of things I could say about him.
We're not judging. We're trying not to judge.
Doing my best. But it does appear that he tried to do right by her, because it appears that he got the divorce so that he would have legal rights over her. And so that's why at 17 and a half, then he was given legal custody. It cleared up her legal status, because again, foster care is very different, and that would never happen in today's era. They've kind of closed those loopholes, but it was much newer back then. And so it left her in a precarious situation where she was in this in-between, and he cleaned up that status. Now, maybe the Redburns paid for the attorney to help that happen. Who knows? Or maybe Christopher, got it done. Yeah. But he showed up.
Yeah.
He showed up when he needed. They got him here somehow. Yeah. And got that done and got that cleared out.
The timing really is, I'm not a person who tends to believe in coincidences anyway, but it would be really coincidental if not related. Yeah. If the divorce and her pending marriage or desired marriage weren't related in some way, because why would you just randomly show up that many years later to file for divorce, especially
and to get custody of the daughter that you never had custody of
at like 17 and a half. Yeah, that's wild. Well, we are going to talk about Florence more another episode, but I do want to talk a little bit about Marie Christine. We're at a little bit of an advantage when it comes to Marie Christine because she is our grandmother and we have some access to information about her. Obviously, if we were another family member looking, we wouldn't even have known her adopted name. Right. But we do know her adopted name was Norma Jean Hickman, and she was adopted by Noah and Nellie Hickman. So we always knew her as Norma Jean.
Yep.
She lived much of her adult life in Macomb, Illinois, a little more than an hour and a half from Springfield, Illinois. Though she seemed to have a loving, stable family, we know that she longed for answers about where she came from. Those were questions that I think brought her great sadness her entire life. We can say that pretty confidently. And as an adult, she did hire a private investigator, do some investigating to try to find answers for her, which means she also had some information to begin with, whatever that
some
was.
Of those letters from that her parents had saved to the adoption agencies.
Could be.
We're going to tell more of her story later. And one more person connected to Estrella to bring up. In her narrative to the Illinois Children's Home and Aid Society, Estrella mentioned only one sister, Louisa. So Louisa, this is the older Louisa.
Right,
with the
right.
O. She was the daughter born to Manuel Suarez and his first wife, Concepcion, who died tragically of typhoid fever in Kansas. Manuel later married Rosa. He and Rosa had 4 more children in addition to Louisa. And of course, Estrella lived with them as well. Estrella and Louisa would have spent the most time together from the time that Louisa was very young. So again, Estrella comes to be a help to the family. Louisa would have been 2 or 3 years old. Right. And so they appeared that they had a bond. It also appears that Estrella may have stayed in touch with Louisa even after leaving Taylor Springs. When she spoke with the Children's Home and Aid Society in the narrative that she gave, Estrella said that Louisa lived in California, which we confirmed. But she hadn't lived there very long, and Estrella had been gone from Taylor Springs for 5 years. She didn't go to California until well after she was married and had the girls.
Yeah.
The only way that she could have known is if she had some contact with Louisa or some other family member who gave her information about what's happening with Louisa.
Right. And that's why Louisa is a thread we want to continue to pull. And we talked about in our last episode that she moved around. She had children. She had
one child. She had one child.
Oh, she had one child, but she had grandchildren. Yes. Sorry. And it is possible that somebody from that family has more information about Estrella, even if just pictures or letters or some
documents,
something, maybe even just family stories, right?
Well, this is where we are now. We have this additional close DNA match in California. Close. Ryan, open your email. We've not been able to connect with him yet.
Yeah.
He closely resembles Paul in centimorgans, but slightly more.
Right.
He is a close match to our mother.
Yeah.
Actually, this person's relationship to our mother is identical to their relationship to Paul and identical to our mother's relationship to Paul and all the other siblings, which means this person is a grandchild of Stella and could not be from any of her current known children. Yeah. His profile is locked down. He's not responded to any messages. He lives in Los Angeles. His name is Ryan Walters.
And we keep coming back to these two major threads that Stella had another child somewhere. And so that is another find that we would like to find. And then Luisa, we do strongly believe that she had some connections. So those are two things we keep coming back to throughout this story. Next episode, we're going to turn focus to Christopher. I know you're ready. I know you're ready. An orphan child, a soldier, a man who moved through the world with an unsettled heart. And we're going to talk about how he kept the thread alive.
There's a lot more for us to look into with Christopher. Many, many, many more threads to pull.
Thanks for listening. If you're walking your own search through DNA research, silence, or your family story, you're not alone.
If you want to learn more about our story, you can read it chapter by chapter on Substack at a blog called Buried Threads. We'd love it if you subscribed or left a review. It helps other listeners to find us. And if you've uncovered something through DNA that changed your understanding of your family, we would love to hear about it. Message us on Substack or find us on Instagram at Buried Threads.
Watch for our next episode to post right here. We'll also be dropping some documents and photos with each podcast. Let us know your questions and your comments as we go.
Until next week, keep pulling the thread.